When Hill Country Austin planted Pflugerville, planted us, we came with about 100 people. I think there were 65 names on our charter, but there were about 100 people that came with us. In 2007, Hill Country Pflugerville planted 2 churches that year. And we were still on the High-Volf model. Now we kind of do the mean lean. I'll talk about that later. A smaller model, more community driven, but target driven. But we sent off 100 people to Round Rock, City View, and 100 people to Hutto in 1 year. And I remember after we sent out the second church, you talk about culture, how different that felt. I mean, think about when you send your first kid off to college and there's an empty chair at the table and it's like, man, the dynamics are completely different. You know, you feel what all of our friends in student ministry feel every time a graduating class leaves and now you got to backfill. Or, your first child gets married. And so, those are some rhythms that we all experience. But you're right. When you're sending people away, it's counterintuitive because most of us think about how do we hang on to people? Like we need the money, we need you to keep giving, we need you to keep coming, we need you to keep serving. And like the idea of it just feels like so counterintuitive. And so that's why I tease with you by saying, what in the world are you guys thinking? Now, I want you to know that I just want to touch base with a few things of why church planting can be very healthy for your church, why it grows a church. And I want to get to that, but I've got 2 assumptions that I have in mind. The first assumption is that you're already convinced that church planting is the call of God. That you have a biblical conviction about church planting. Now, my assumption may be wrong with you, and during Q&A we can go through, like, here's kind of what I feel like is a biblical case, a biblical mandate for church planting. But for those of you that are going to move in this counterintuitive direction, you got to be convinced that this is not Danny's idea. This is of God, that God wants us to make disciples who plant churches. So I'm going to assume that you have some conviction or you wouldn't have been here today. The second assumption that I'm making is that, that you're really wanting to think about, like, how do we get this done in a way that the church is going to survive, so that's one of the key questions. Did you guys get a handout? No. Okay, they must not have made their way over here during the migration. Can I get somebody they should be on the table up front somewhere. Church planting grows your church, something like that in the title. Yeah, so the other assumption I'm making is that you understand the kingdom benefits of planting. So I'm not going to take time to think about, all the different quotes, all the different gurus who have said the best thing we can do for evangelism is to plant churches. You get that, I'm assuming, that church planting is really good for kingdom expansion. So you have a biblical conviction about planting, and you understand the kingdom benefits. We're talking today about what are the benefits for your church locally. Those people that you're currently pastoring, shepherding, training, equipping, what are those benefits? So that's really what I want to do today. So number one, and again, some notes are coming, is that church planting really does energize and inspire churches. Church planting energizes and inspires the church with a larger purpose than simply growing the church. I cannot tell you how many times over the course of my 23 years or whatever planting, how many people said to me, what I really like about this church is the purpose you guys have. This vision that you have of going after every man, woman, child. And I would say, well, you mean like after my preaching, right? You're here, you're jazzed because of my preaching, and then it's, no, that's not it. No, numerous people would say, I love it that you guys are trying to do something that's bigger than just like seeing how many people you can get into the building. Now, that always stuck with me because I always thought it was just me. Like, I was so moved. I'm so jazzed about that vision of going beyond what we can do in any one of our churches individually about what can we do in collaborating to go after an entire geography, an entire city. Like, that is moving to me, and I suggest that just as I've heard, that as you guys move in this direction, as you go public, if you haven't already, to start, like, let your church know, hey, we're going to go after people in our city, or whether you're planting elsewhere nationally or globally, but that, hey, we're going to invest funds in people to reach. That energizes and inspires people because it's the call of God. It's what God is doing. It's God wants of the church. So when I think about this larger purpose, I want to use a familiar illustration that Dave Rhodes, Will Mancini, and a couple of different guys have used, but it really talks about one of the important things that has to happen in a church. And this is... This is not inaccurate, but it's inadequate. Did you any luck with those?
Are they in there?
I don't know.
We didn't see. Is that your portfolio?
Yeah. No, they'd be stacked right there inside there, or they were stacked on those tables, the front table. Okay, it's all right. It's not that much material, so yeah, they're somewhere. Yeah. This is life-changing. This is life-changing right here. I don't know if you're feeling it. Might not kick in until afterwards. But there's really only these 4 major things I'm developing. And so this is one of them. And again, the context here is that people get engaged about a big story. And so a lot of times, we can all relate to this, that the story that we tell sometimes is reduced. It basically tells the story of just trying to connect people to your church. And so it's the idea that we want people to attend, we want people to connect, we want people to serve. And so you may use different words, you may even add a word in there, but you have some kind of what we call assimilation. All right, so the people who come and visit, we really want them to stick, and so we've got this strategy, and this is really good. Generally speaking, 100% who attend, maybe 50% may connect in small groups or, whatever vehicle that you use. Adult Bible Fellowship or whatever. About a 50% will connect, and then maybe 25% will actually serve. Now, I know that you guys are probably beating those percentages. This is just generally speaking, okay? So you may, especially if your church is smaller, you may say, man, we've got 100% of our people in small groups. But churches that are larger, those percentages start dropping, right? So generally speaking, you've got diminishing return, all right? And that's the play that you're running to connect. And nothing wrong with that. This is a really important part. So don't hear me minimizing that. It does lead me to think, as these guys love to say, is that those that just work that funnel, they basically have an approach to the Great Commission, what they call a functional Great Commission. Go into all the world and make worship attenders, baptizing them in the name of small groups, and teaching them to serve at least once a month. And that for many churches, that's kind of like that is success. And so we measure those things, and I think you should measure those things. We measure those things, but we tend to basically call it, that's our finish line. If I can get you to visit, I can get you to come, and I can get you to connect, then we're good with that. So the bigger story, the more complete story, is where you've got a separate funnel that captures the idea of that we're going to start with a few. The future is always in the hands of the few. Eric said, work with your remnant. That idea that we're going to call and we're going to train and we're going to send. And so in Luke 8:1, It says that Jesus is going about from town to town preaching, and his disciples are with him, but he's doing the communication, he's doing the teaching. And then you go from Luke 8:1 to Luke 9:1, and it says that Jesus calls the disciples to be with him, and he sends them out to go and preach. You remember that? And so you move from 1 to 12 in Luke 8:1, 9:1. And then in Luke 10:1, he sends out the 72. I love that. And so if this is the law of diminishing returns, this is the idea of, hey, we're really beginning with a few. We're training, we're equipping so that they can multiply and move forward. Finally, when you go into Acts 1, you find 120 people in the upper room. You get where the church is born, and you start seeing thousands of people coming to faith. So this funnel, what we call the multiplication funnel, is the idea of not only gathering, it's scattering. It's not just the idea of assimilating, but it's multiplying. And so, I think that this is a great point that we have to merge those two together. So, sometimes, we are so bad at moving from one extreme to the other that we think about attraction, getting people into our church, and we do that. We run that play hard, and then for some of us, including me, there was a time when you kind of woke up and said, "Whoa, wait a minute. We've got to do more than attraction. In fact, we need to stop doing attraction. We need to start just doing multiplication." So we're all about trying to make disciples and finding a strategy that works, make and multiply disciples and plant churches. But you find out you really need both of these, not just one of these. So this is the traditional playbook, the blue. And what we're saying is that our people get jazzed when they start realizing that we're actually trying to do something much bigger than just fill the four walls of our building. That we're really trying to send people out by training them and multiplying disciples, and actually send people out, whether it's missions or church planting or whatever. So I love this idea, and I firmly believe that your people will get engaged in that. It takes a vision, takes communication, takes conviction, but this is kind of the bigger story here. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about is this idea that church planting models corporately what you are encouraging individually. And so these two feed off of each other. And so you think about, what is it that we want our people in our church individually to do? We want them to, spend time with God. We want them to walk with God. We want them to be serving. We want them to be thinking about people in their world who are far away from God and trying to share the gospel. We want them to make disciples. You think about what you want individually, and when you guys as church leaders say that we're going to church as a church corporately, go after multiplying, that encourages them and inspires them, continues to model for them individually. And just to kind of, flesh this out even more, I thought I had a little chart. Well, I guess I do in your notes. You see that little chart there. So corporately, just to fill that out, you see, man, when we're reaching the city geographically, reaching the city geography, when you say, hey, we're going to join in church planting because we're trying to reach our geography, and that's driven by Acts 1:8, when Jesus told us you're going to receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and uttermost parts of the earth. And so that idea, when you begin in your city, and there's this geographic progression, we think is, Luke is doing more than just outlining the book of Acts. He's making a point about how, the gospel is to expand out, beginning geographically in geographic progression. So when you're casting vision to your church about, we're trying to reach our geography, we're trying to reach greater Austin, collaboration for saturation in the city. So if that's what you decide to do and you're communicating that, what that does is encourage individuals to think about reaching their own geography. So reaching personal geography would be the idea there in the second column. So, I feel like it is so obvious, but just to state the obvious, if we say as a church we want to reach our geography, it implies when you just reduce down to the individual level that each of us are thinking about reaching our geography. Now, sometimes we say, who are the people far away from God among, those whom you live with, work with, play with, study with? They may be neighbors on your street, but it reduces to each person in your church saying, look, if we as a church are going to mobilize for every man, woman, child, we've got to mobilize every man, woman, child in the church to reach every man, woman, child outside of the church. And so this idea of reaching your personal geography. So when we think about church planting grows your church, we're not necessarily thinking like numerically your church is going to grow and grow, though it might. This is the idea that spiritually speaking, in their own development and deployment, they're learning, okay, we're going after our geography. That means I need to go after my geography. So one of the things, everybody, is that we've got to individually model this idea that we can name the people that live around us, that we work with. We've got names of people, that are far away from God that we're trying to reach, like we're sharing the gospel with. And Kathy and I we've lived in Pflugerville for 23 years, and we've had some neighbors come and go, but we've always connected with our neighbors. Every day we pray for our neighbors. We're interacting. We have them over our house. We go over there. Kathy's doing English as a second language with some people from Cuba that just moved in next to us. And they don't speak a word of English. Incredible 3 families that live there. So anyway, I can tell you a lot of different stories about that, but we model what we're wanting our people to do. And so I'm arguing that one of the ways you develop your people is that when you lead out that as a church, we're going to go after our geography, it encourages them to do the same thing individually. Okay, back to our chart. Okay, corporately, we're trying to reproduce missional bases. So every church that we plant becomes another base of operations that extends the reach into our city. So you're reproducing missional bases. So I just love that. When we think about, okay, where in the church, where in the city is it under-churched? Where are new growth taking place? What are the hard areas in Austin? Urban Austin. What are the places that we need to reach and go after? So we think about establishing missional bases where on the individual side, it's reproducing missional behavior. So as we think about that, we're trying to get people trained. And part of that right side of the funnel, calling, training, and sending, is that you've got a strategy for discipling your people, helping them learn how to live a missional lifestyle, living a sent life, getting the gospel out, how to work to disciple someone to the degree that they can disciple someone. You don't get multiplication until you get to second, third generation. And getting them with a mindset of going for a church plant. So the third row is multiplied churches versus multiplying disciples. So all of that, which simply is to say, that when you guys lead off saying we're going to plant churches, these bases of operation, it really encourages individuals in your church to think, what is my part in this? And it says, hey, we got to all be in the game of trying to reach the people in our own personal geography. All right, a third thing that I want to get to is this, that church planting creates and maintains a healthy pressure on attraction and multiplication. All right. So when I think about the churches that I work with, that a common scenario is that once a church finally gets where, hey, we've got enough people attending and enough money coming in where our future is secure, that you're really tempted to let off your foot in terms of going after people. And I wish that wasn't true, but I know that that's true in my own life, that, hey, if I think, man, we've really, for our church, to continue functioning, we're going to have to go after people. And so when you plant, we all get that. If you've church plant, Delton is a church planter. I look at Jake's church planter. Like, all these guys, you were planted. You remember what that's like. Call it hungry, call it desperate. But like, hey, this church, like, if we're going to go forward, we've got to get some people. And so you're really working that. You're praying for that. You're doing what you can to energize your people, trying to build an invitational culture. Like, we've got to get people into the door. And so when you're sending people out, you're maintaining that sense of hunger. It's like, okay, we got to replace these. When I was telling you earlier about that first year that we started planning, we sent out 200 people to 2 different churches in 1 year. And we felt that. I remember we gathered all of our people together in like a leadership community, and we just processed out loud together like what that felt like. And so, you think what it's like in a congregation. Well, each of these guys who are small group leaders are thinking, hey, in my small group, we lost these people. I was really hoping that person would start a new group. You start processing that. I remember we handed out a pen to everybody that had the words, write the next chapter. Like, what's the next chapter going to be? Because we at that time experienced the idea that we have really got to keep working both attraction, like bringing new people in, as well as multiplication. Because when you send out quality leaders to go plant, if you don't have an infrastructure that's multiplying and developing leaders to take the place of the leaders you send out, you're gonna hit a hard wall when it comes to like surviving. You got to have that machine wheel working. So I love this idea because it keeps a healthy pressure on both attracting and multiplication. Now, I know that not all of us here share the same polity, church government, but in our context, in Hill Country, we have rotating elders. So generally speaking, an elder come on the board for 3 years and then rotates off. And when you have men who are rotating off the elder board, I tell you, it creates a very healthy pressure on leadership development. Because if you're not doing elder training and leader development, and guys rotate off the board, and there's no one to put on that board, and so year after year, your elder board is reducing from 7 to 5 to 3. Like, you have to be doing leadership development. That's what I mean by healthy pressure. Pressure that helps you do something that is necessary and good and falls under the calling of God. So we get that. As leaders, we get that. Healthy pressure. Same way with church planting. That's why church planting grows your church. It keeps a healthy pressure on continuing to go after people and nurturing your invitational culture and really working attraction and multiplication. Now, I want to borrow another graphic from these guys at Clarity House. And many of you have seen this, but he basically says, look, imagine your church with 2 floors. And on the first floor, the lower room, this is the things that are, generally speaking, what attracts people into your church. And so the personalities up front. So, your speaker, your communicator, your anyone that's leading worship, or the upfront personalities. Some people come to the church because, man, I like that guy. I can relate to that guy. Or I love the way that worship is done there, but that worship leader, like, in other words, people up front. Sometimes that's why people go. What we learned from Eric with some of the stats today is that when you come down here to people, A lot of times people come to the church because, man, these are my peeps. Like, I love these people. And even though I may move out of the area physically, that's still my social context. And so I'm driving across town and continue at that church. Because, man, I love those people. And that's what people connect to. Sometimes sometimes it's the place. I like that building. That's really convenient location. Hey, they've got some neat layout for kids. Sometimes place is really helpful. Programs. I like what they do for our kids. I like what they do for student ministry. So there's some programs that I like. And so all of you could probably rate, just trying to imagine, like, what is it that attracts people to our church? And you're the way you would rate them, it may be different from the church next to you or across the room. But generally speaking, these are things that attract people into your church. That is basically like the left side of the funnel, the attraction assimilation funnel. And then the upper room really has the idea of purpose. That's what would correlate with the right side of the funnel fusion, where purpose is kind of this shared disciple-making vision. Now remember, what point I'm developing here is that church planting helps create a healthy pressure on both attraction, that's all of this, as well as multiplication. So sometimes when you think, hey, we're trying to make disciples in our church, and then we get to the point where we look at everybody in our church, and like they've kind of been through whatever disciple-making deal we do. Like, I don't know what else we do with these people. And some of that is that, you're hopefully seeing people come to faith that you're going to disciple. And sometimes it's the idea that we need to restock the pond. Like, we need to continue attracting people into our church. And so we need to be doing excellent ministry that is attractional in nature. Remember, that's not inaccurate. It's just inadequate if that's all that you're doing. In some churches, the traditional church, this is all they're doing. Other church models, sometimes even house churches, tend to just do this with very little of this. But we're trying to suggest to you that the kind of vision and strategy that's going to excite your people is the idea where you've got quality of ministry that's helping to attract people, that's feeding an invitational culture. And then in their illustration, you'd have like a stairwell, spiral staircase that leads up to the second floor. That's where people are called and trained and sent. That's that right side of the funnel. And when you're church planting and you're sending people out, and by God's grace, God willing, you're not talking about just planting one church. You're talking about, until Jesus comes back. This is what we're going to do. We make disciples and we plant churches. And if you're going to commit toward that, as I pray that you would, you've got to have a church culture that is both attracting and multiplying. You've got to work both of those two ideas. Keeps healthy pressure. All right, there's one last thing I want to develop, and I want to get some discussion going. And that is this fourth statement, which is church planting strengthens a church culture. Church planting strengthens a church culture that combats consumerism and encourages reproduction throughout the church. Now, that's a lot of words, but we all know what consumerism does in the church, where people come mainly just wanting to consume whatever programs you're offering. You're going to meet my needs. You're going to raise my children. If my children have a problem, it's the youth pastor's fault. You're serving. You're here to serve me. And so we recognize that when people are immature and when they don't know Jesus, that's understandable. But I think sometimes as pastors, we get frustrated when people never seem to mature beyond that. And so consumerism just kind of dominates. And so, you've heard the frustration of your children's ministry director who says, man, I'm trying like crazy to recruit people to serve. But nobody's willing to serve, or not enough people are willing to serve. The idea that when Jesus said, I didn't come to be served, but to serve, give my life as a ransom for many, that not many of our people have necessarily bought into that mentality. They're still coming to be served, not to serve. So we get that, but we understand that in the process of developing and deploying people, of helping them mature beyond that, away from consumerism. So when you're planting a church, you're again modeling, and you're basically screaming the idea that we don't necessarily exist for ourselves alone. That we exist to be a blessing to other people. That this is about really experiencing the joy and fullness of life that comes as you're giving your life away. So Jesus says it's better to give than to receive. This idea really helps combat consumerism. And then it also, secondly, encourages reproduction throughout the church. So, if you have small groups in your church, and they're really comfortable with each other, oh man, I love the people in I love my small group. And you think, well, I want you to pray about, trying to multiply. Don't use the word divide. It's not good. We're not for division. But if we're going to multiply small groups, and so you're approaching some of your leadership to say, hey, who are you developing as an apprentice who can start a new group? And they go, oh no, well, we don't want to do that. No, you don't understand. We're family. Man, we are tight. And we totally get that. That's our default nature, to move toward comfort and stability. But you know what it's like to multiply a small group. Hey, we're going to send Joe and Mary out with one other couple, and they're going to start a new group. And man, we're going to commission them. We're going to pray for them. And man, we're trying to reach more people. And so you're leading your people to want to do that. Well, when you just scale upward from that, you get to church planting. And so if you're saying we're going to send 20, 30, 40, 50 people into an area to plant a church, we're saying this is who we are. This is what we do. And so how can we then say to small group leaders, yeah, we don't really need to multiply. But in order to attract more people and get them in the fishing pond, to restock the ponds, you've got to continue to multiply small groups as a place where people can come into. Small groups plays a really key role in multiplication, and that's a whole other topic. But a place where people are coming in and they're finding connection, and out of that, which people are drawing for discipleship and leadership development and reproduction for your multiplication purposes. So anyway, that's an example. Same way with ministry. All right, so if you have some key leaders in your church who've been running areas of ministry, that's really good. We all like stability. We like that. But sometimes what church planting does for you is that when it sends leaders out, you've got to recruit new leaders. You've got to develop new leaders. And so more people are getting involved in ministry. It's amazing how often I've seen this happen, where there are key men who for some reason never got overly connected in ministry. It could be a whole number of different reasons. But all of a sudden, they go with a church plant where it's like all hands on deck. And the next thing you know, in a year or so, like they're on the elder board. You're thinking, what? I couldn't get the guy to serve in children's ministry. But anyway, people step up in places where there's an absence of leaders. This is part of the life-giving cycle, gentlemen, that happens when we plant. And so I love this idea because when you're given a church planting, it does strengthen that idea. It helps you combat consumerism and really helps to encourage reproduction throughout the whole church. And so we can talk about other examples of that, but that's just the truth of it. So you'll notice as we kind of transition towards some questions here, that what I didn't do is kind of walk you through why I think church planting just biblically is what you ought to do. We can do that, but I'm assuming you have that in place. You understand, hey, church planting really helps to expand the kingdom. But when I'm thinking, especially you guys on the elder board, when I'm thinking, what is our budget? What size of church are we? Will we survive this? And I just want you to see that this takes courageous faith. When Jesus, talking about his own life, said, unless a grain of wheat falls and dies, it stands alone. But if it falls and dies, it produces fruit. It reproduces and multiplies. And then immediately he goes right into, hey, if we try to save our life, we'll lose it. But if we lose our life for the cause of Christ, we'll save it. What should we give in exchange for our soul? So in other words, the idea that we individually give our life away, we deny ourselves, take up the cross daily. Where Jesus kind of moves from come and believe, come and follow me, come and die. That's where things start happening. And it's the same way individually as a church. That when we take the steps, what feels risky, and it requires courageous faith to move forward, that's what God can use to bless. Now He'll grow and spiritually your people in your church, but you'll bless the area geographically as well. So a lot more to be said on all that, but let's just kind of get some comments, get some questions going. Like what thoughts, reactions, accusations do you guys have? Comments, questions? Yeah.
No, I just thought somebody said accusations.
Yeah, preferably one at a time. Don't talk on top of each other. Really, quit it. Okay. Comments? Yes. Simon.
So you talked about, that guy that really hasn't done much in the church, but he goes to the church plant and all of a sudden he's serving.
Yeah.
How do you determine if that guy is a guy that is going to step up or would be a dead weight to a church?
Yeah, I was never able to predict it. I just saw it happen enough where, hey, this is a pretty common pattern where guys who, it's not like he would ever discourage them from going, but that they went and then you see them step up in big ways. Because there's such a void. I mean, when you plant a church, there's that sense, all hands on deck. And some of you know what that feels like, where you've got your 30 or 40 people, and let's say that you've been meeting in small groups that have multiplied maybe 4 or 5 times, and now you're launched a service, and all of a sudden there's things that need to happen. And so you have key people that are wearing 2 or 3 or 4 different hats. Hey, I serve on the elder board, I'm doing set up and tear down, and I'm leading a small group. That's a pretty common scenario. And sometimes in churches that aren't hear this with a measure of salt, but sometimes when churches are large and comfortable, everything's covered. Now you're always looking for people in children's ministry but basically things are covered. And so there's not as many opportunities for people to step up and serve in significant ways. Now there's ways around that, but when you're church planting, not only have you just vacated several roles for people to kind of grow into, but you've also sent people where they're going to be needed in big ways. It encourages them to step up. That's what we mean by church planting can grow your church, can grow them developmentally, spiritually. There is the myth of the perfect time to plant, and it's a myth. There is no perfect time to plant. Let me just tell you, if you're less than 100 and you think, well, we can't plant, we're too small, let's wait till we get to 100. So you get past 100 people and you go, oh man, now we can afford getting that youth pastor. Just think, we need someone to come in and work with our, and so we're going to need to wait. We can't wait. And so we wait. Well, when we get to 200, when we get to 200 people, yeah, we'll be stable enough. We'll plant a church then. We'll send off people and givers and money. And when you get to 200 people and people are going like, man, like, we don't have any room to meet. We need to be thinking about some kind of facility. We need to get out of the school into some permanent lease. And so, man, that's going to cost us money. And so your elder board's at elder retreat and they're planning their budget. They're thinking, well, we can't really afford to send people away and send people now. And then, you start making moves and get facilities and maybe, you buy land and you're trying to build a building and you think, how in the world can we send people away then? How can we're trying to get into this new building. And the larger you go, there's always the idea, hey, there's more staff to hire. And so the idea that you're going to give people and money away is so stinking counterintuitive that it takes great faith. And gentlemen, just think about that young couple. They just got married and they don't have any habit of giving. And you say to them, look, God just says, prayerfully determine before Him what percentage of your income to give. It's a test of faith. Don't wait to the end of the month, see how much money you have left. Pick what you're going to give. And they say, are you kidding me? That feels so counterintuitive, right? Yet it's the very same thing that we say to our people about giving, that we need to recognize as a church. That what feels counterintuitive, for the sake of every man, woman, and child, to the glory of God, that we would plant churches and give away people and money to make it happen. Question?
So this is really good. Way to go.
Thank you, son. It's always great to have a son that thinks you're doing a good job.
A lot of this, tell me about the communication to the church leading up to the plant. You're modeling this, the fact that it's happening, but how are you leveraging these talking points? What does that look like? Are you gathering the whole church to talk about church planting? And is that a regular occurring thing?
Yeah.
Does this happen in small groups or just a lot of different ways? But how are the people in your church really being pushed to think personally about their geography and reproduce missional behavior, multiplying disciples as y'all go about church planting? Does that make sense?
Yes. So the communication part of this is crucial. And once your elders or your leadership structure have really committed to planting, and that's the first thing, is to get everybody like-minded about God's call to plant. Then you start going public. And you get to announce to the church on a Sunday morning, hey, before we get into the word this morning, I'm excited to announce that God's really led our elder board to say we need to plant a church. And you're going to hear more about that, but I just want you to know, to be praying with us about that we're looking for someone who can plant a church. And so you're doing some initial communication, and that announcement is going to be followed up in all of your small groups. So all your small group leaders kind of get a heads up, and so they're talking, hey, what do you guys think about the announcement about planting a church? And so then you look at all your communication vehicles, and all of you have different ones. You have announcements from the front, you may do some kind of literature or newsletter, weekly, monthly. You're looking for all those different forms, and you're doing regular communication through that to the church. Hey, keep praying. We're still praying, looking for our church plant resident. Then you are, as well, from the pulpit, you're looking for opportunities to keep this in front of your people. And so, if you know of another sister church that you're connected to, and maybe they've planted, and you say, hey, this one, we want to celebrate the fact that there's new churches starting today in our city. And you maybe even have a short video to show. But you pray for that church, and so you're looking for every opportunity, and it only has to be 2 or 3 sentences. that you're saying on somewhat of a regular basis. Lead pastors, like when you meet with your leadership team, your elder board or whatever, like you're regularly updating. So there's a monthly report that happens about, hey, here's kind of where we are in our search for a church plant resident. Here's what's going on in our city. 2 weeks ago, Valley Church launched, and Travis launched there in Decker Lane, and hey, you celebrate that. You're bringing people up to speed on that. So, Jake, those are just rhythms. Like, what are the venues that we have, and what rhythms do we want to create where we're communicating through those vehicles? Now, the stuff about disciple making and multiplication and living on mission, that's part of your disciple making strategy. So that's a little bit different question. But those two merge, right? They complement. That's part of what I'm arguing today, is that the more we go church planting, the more it encourages the individual stuff.
Did y'all ever have a time where you had a special church meeting, talk about okay, we're going to plant a church, and then you try to call everybody together, and you're talking through the why and the how and what this means for you personally, what the next steps might be for you? Was that any part of you with them?
When we do our annual business meeting, our family meeting, we talk about it then all the time. But we were into church planting pretty strong early on, and it never felt like we were communicating as a first time. It was more of just kind of nurturing, because you guys know how much change over you have in your church. Average person's in your church maybe 7 years or less. For you guys, Jay, less than that with so many college students. But so you have to keep nurturing that. Same way with your elder board. If you've got men on your elder board who are rotating off, you have to continue nurturing that conviction with your board. So I would think for a church that hasn't been into church planting, that they would do what you're suggesting. I think that would be a great idea. That really adds excitement, like a special meeting. Hey, we're really excited to make an announcement today. I want you guys all to come. I think that's a great way. And you cast the vision. I think it's really important to kind of walk through the biblical mandate for planting and kind of that whole picture. And then announce that God has led us to commit to planting. And here's what this means for you. It's a great idea. Other questions? Yes.
This is really good.
What?
I want you to hear that from someone beside yourself.
Did Delton pay you any money to say that?
No, so I stepped out, so if you already answered this, we can move on. Is there a resource that you would recommend as I work with congregations that do have a desire to be on mission, to see multiplication, just not at the expense of their own church closing? And so there's a bit of a challenge there where they're like, we see the neighborhoods change, we've seen all these things happen, we want to be involved in that, but we also don't want to see the current church, sending church close at the expense of that. So do you have a resource that, as we go into those churches, to kind of help facilitate that? Do you have a resource we can give or point them to help them see that both can win? Both can win.
There's some books I can mention, and like one would be was it Future Church? Future Church by I think that's Will Mancini. That's a church that that's a book that kind of walks through some strategy about planning and how to think about the purpose and call of the church. And some of the illustrations I used today were from that. The funnel fusion, the lower room, upper room, from that. So that's one resource. I will say that one of my great joys is to sit down with churches, sit down with elder boards and just help them think through, some of the questions that they have about planting. And so that would be another resource I'll mention to you. Also, Mark here at Parkway, he's willing to fund completely any church plant. Coming out of today, anybody that wants to plant a church and you don't think you have the money. Mark, you guys are so generous. Just see him directly. He's got a couple of elders with him. They'll write checks. Okay, so
Is there anything specific?
any other resources you guys can think of? Yeah.
No, I have a different question.
Okay, wait, Alex. Any other thing that come to mind?
I think specifically too, I really appreciate that you said that it would help them grow spiritually.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if there's something out there that says, that actually shows.
Gaining by losing is really good.
What is that?
Gaining by losing by J.D. Greer. Good on that.
Church planting is all like a good capital campaign. You know, Hawks used to say, people grow spiritually when you're calling them to give sacrificially. He says, you ought to have a campaign every few years, even if you just took all the money that was given and burned it in the parking lot. Because the value of what happens to someone as they wrestle through letting go of money is so good. And so he's exaggerating to make a point. Same way with planting. Like that spiritual growth, that development, that commitment to the cause of Christ. Church planting can do the same thing. Alex, you have a question?
Because planting a Spanish church is different from your church, not only the language, but income-wise.
Yes.
Many of the answers that I've been receiving from the people is, I have to work, and I've never been in seminary.
Uh-huh.
Are they, like he was saying, are there resources, or is there a place, or you guys, like someone is an engineer, and he wants to plant a church, but he never been in ministry,
Yeah.
or he never been studying the Bible, and that's one of the major fears and answers that we've been receiving.
Yeah. So we've been identifying, certain seminaries that guys are using for online training, and so we have ideas that we can share about that, how guys can pursue that, and we have a number of different men who do that. So that's something in motion. The other thing is that, Alex, there are different models, as you know. You're bivocational. So the idea of some guys who might get into planting, they may do it from a bivocational standpoint, where they can maintain their job, but still develop a church and, see what the future brings. There are also traditional kind of church plants, and then there are the house church or micro church plants. There are some that are more traditional, looking to be more of a larger church, and some that aren't. So there's a lot of variety about how you plant and how you fund it. So some of our churches, they want to completely fund their church plant resident. And sometimes churches don't have that kind of money available, and so they're going to ask a church plant resident to raise a portion of their funding. Some churches will partner with other second chair churches that may share in the funding, as well as help send people to the plant. And so there's a lot of different ways to skin this thing. So sometimes in churches that have some unique challenges, that's needed. Mark?
Just another question.
Yeah.
When you talk about the upper room and lower room,
Yeah.
fusion funnel on either side, could you just talk a little bit about that tension of there's going to be a gravitational pull towards attractional for most. There's going to be some gravitational pull towards the missional side, and we're saying both and, not either or. How do you manage that tension that you feel?
Yeah. We'd probably say there's always going to be that tension. And so managing it, I think, is just making sure you're investing time and resources into both of those ideas. So one of the things I love that what you guys are doing is that you're really trying to track some of your desired outcomes. And so, I think you're reporting monthly on progress about church planting, but also quarterly, you're reporting out, like, how is the church doing? So on the attractional side, how many people are attending? How many people are serving? How many people are connected in, small groups or family? That funnel, you're reporting on that quarterly. But you're also, and even more importantly, you're tracking like how many of our people gave testimony that they're actually sharing the gospel. I know many of you use that BLESS acronym as a strategy for mission. Like how many people are involved in blessing their neighbors? You try to track that. How many people are involved in discipleship relationships? So people who are either being discipled or they are doing the discipling. How many second and third generation discipleship relationships do we have? And so that is one of the ways that you manage attention. So, when you do those reports, it's basically going to say, hey, this is going well, this is not going well. Or praise God, everything's going well. Or, it helps you identify. Like you think disciple making is going on in your church, but you can't find anyone who's doing it. So if you're not tracking, if you're not trying to keep up with that, then you may not be aware. First step of leadership is define reality. What's your current reality? And so some of you may have extra thoughts to Mark's question, but I think you guys do a great job of doing that quarterly report where you're keeping up with that stuff. Guys, I think we've gone long, and I was supposed to give you all time to go to the bathroom and stuff like that. But yeah.
I just wanted to say this was really good, just so you can hear it again.
Am I coming across insecure? Are y'all feeling the need to affirm me? Thank you. All right. Hey, God, thank you for our time together. Lord, we ask that you would bless us and make us fruitful and to multiply and fill the earth with disciple makers. Lord, to your great glory. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everyone.